It was on the damp and wind-whipped evening of October the 3rd that the quiet respectability of Halcyon Court was disturbed. Not by a gunshot, not by a scream, but by a silence so unnatural that it became sinister. For Halcyon Court was a place where life proceeded with comfortable predictability. The polished row of Edwardian townhouses formed a crescent around a private garden, and their inhabitants were of the variety who believed that one's curtains should be drawn at exactly the same hour each night. They were bankers and barristers, widows of impeccable social standing, and retired colonels whose moustaches were as rigid as their routines. And among them lived Mr. Lionel Vale, a man of 58, tall, mild-mannered, and known for an almost obsessive punctuality. Breakfast at 7:30. Post collected at 8. An afternoon walk at precisely 3. And most famously, he answered his door at the first chime, never allowing a second ring. His neighbors often joked that Mr. Vale must stand permanently in the hallway, waiting for callers like a butler anticipating the bell. So when, on that wind-swept October evening, the maid from number 6 knocked 3 times at his door, each louder than the last, and received no reply, she felt the hairs on her neck rise. By the time the constable arrived, summoned by the increasingly alarmed neighbors, the entire crescent buzzed with speculation. Lights glowed behind lace curtains as silhouettes lingered, whispering. Constable Reeves rapped with an official firmness. "Mr. Vale? Are you within, sir?" Only silence answered. He turned to the small crowd that had gathered. Mrs. Hartwell, the elderly widow with a nervous temperament, Mr. Gresham, the retired colonel whose booming voice could have summoned the dead, Miss Amelia Thornton, elegant and self-possessed, and Mrs. Reeves, the overly inquisitive wife of the constable. "When was he last seen?" Reeves asked. "Yesterday afternoon," Colonel Gresham declared. 3 o'clock sharp. He passed my window on his usual constitutional." "Indeed," added Mrs. Hartwell, "and he waved to me as he always does." Miss Thornton, who lived directly opposite Mr. Vale, spoke more quietly. "I heard his gramophone last night around 9. Chopin, I believe. It stopped abruptly." The wind rustled the leaves along the crescent, hushing the group. Constable Reeves frowned, then made his decision. "If he does not answer now, I'll be obliged to force an entry." And at that moment, as if conjured by the mounting tension itself, a sleek black motor car glided into Halcyon Court and came to a dignified stop. Its passenger stepped out with meticulous care, adjusting the knot of his tie and gently brushing an errant speck from his immaculate overcoat. A small, impeccably groomed Belgian gentleman surveyed the gathering with raised eyebrows and a faintly amused expression. "Messieurs, mesdames," he said, bowing slightly, "I pray that I am not too late." It was, of course, Hercule Poirot. The sigh of collective relief was almost comical. Even Constable Reeves straightened with new confidence. "Poirot!" Mrs. Hartwell exclaimed. "But how?" "I was summoned," Poirot said, touching his hat. "By Mr. Vale himself." A ripple of shock swept through the crowd. "He wrote to me yesterday morning," Poirot continued. "A letter most curious. He asked that I come at once. He believed, how shall I say, that a grave danger awaited him." Miss Thornton's hand flew to her mouth. Danger? But Mr. Vale was the gentlest of men. Poirot held up a gloved finger. "Nevertheless, he requested my presence, and from what I observe, something has happened, n'est-ce pas? The gathering of anxious neighbors, the police constable prepared to break down the door. It suggests that Mr. Vale has not greeted his visitors as he usually does. He is a man of, how do you English say, clockwork habit." "Exactly," Mrs. Reeves gasped. "He never misses a knock." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then, my friends, let us see what the little grey cells will reveal." Constable Reeves swallowed and stepped aside. "Would you advise we force entry, sir?" "Proceed," Poirot said softly, "but gently. Order, always order." With a shoulder to the door and a firm push, the lock yielded. The group braced themselves as the door swung open with a groan. Inside, the hallway was spotless, too spotless. The umbrella stand gleamed. The console table displayed not a speck of dust, but there was something else, a faint scent. Poirot inhaled. "Lavender water," he murmured. Most curious. Mr. Vale was a man who preferred the citrus, never the floral. Reeves called out cautiously, "Mr. Vale, are you home, sir?" Still nothing. Poirot moved forward, his polished shoes silent on the tiled floor. He scanned every detail, the coat not hanging on its usual hook, the absence of yesterday's post on the tray, the odd arrangement of the rugs. "Colonel Gresham," Poirot said without turning, "you are a man of military discipline. Tell me, does anything strike you as irregular?" The colonel squinted. "Well, now that you mention it. Vale's hats. He keeps them lined up like soldiers, but that one on the end, it's slightly askew." Poirot smiled knowingly. "Ah, you see, even a small disorder tells a story." Miss Thornton's voice trembled. "Poirot, do you think something dreadful has happened?" "My dear mademoiselle," Poirot said, pausing at the foot of the stairs, "I think that something most unnatural has occurred." He ascended slowly, each step deliberate. At the landing, he paused again. From the corridor ahead, a draught whispered along the floor. "A window is open," Poirot said. "That is impossible," Mrs. Hartwell shrieked. He was terrified of draughts. Poirot nodded. Just so. He pushed open the door to the study and stopped. The room was in perfect order. Not a book out of place. Not a pen misplaced, yet the window beside the writing desk was open a full 6 inches, curtains fluttering in the cold night air, and on the desk lay a single envelope, unsealed. Addressed to Hercule Poirot. Poirot approached it with reverence, and when he lifted the flap, the group behind him heard only the faint rustle of paper. Poirot read the brief contents silently, his face becoming an unreadable mask. "What does it say?" Miss Thornton whispered. Poirot folded the letter carefully. "It says," he replied softly, "that Mr. Lionel Vale expected to be dead before I arrived." The room fell into frozen silence. Poirot looked toward the open window, then at the immaculate desk, the lavender scent, the faint misalignment of objects. "Mes amis," he said quietly. Mr. Vale did not simply fail to answer his door. He turned to face them, eyes sharp as polished steel. "He has vanished." For a long moment after Poirot's pronouncement, no one spoke. The draught from the open window stirred the heavy curtains, whispering like a breath from another world. Mrs. Hartwell clutched the back of a chair for support. Colonel Gresham's mustache bristled with indignation. Miss Thornton trembled visibly, though she tried to hide it behind a veneer of poise. "Vanished," Constable Reeves echoed at last. "Do you mean run away, sir, or carried off?" Poirot turned slowly, his expression as controlled as the ticking of a metronome. "My good constable, people do not simply evaporate. If Mr. Vale left this house, he did so either by his own volition or because another wished him gone." Mrs. Reeves gasped dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. "Kidnapped! I knew it. I told you, George, the world has become dreadfully unsafe." Poirot cast her a faintly indulgent look before returning his gaze to the room. "No," he said softly. "Not kidnapped. Not as the first option. The letter he left for me suggests preparation, not struggle. But," he moved toward the window and touched the sill delicately, "there are contradictions, and contradictions, mes amis, are the fingerprints of truth." He motioned to Constable Reeves. "Let us begin by assembling all those who knew Mr. Vale well. For a disappearance, like a murder, occurs never in isolation." The constable nodded and hurried downstairs, eager to do something useful. Poirot remained in the study, his eyes sweeping the room with precise, methodical attention. He examined the clock on the mantel, set 5 minutes fast. Curious. Mr. Vale was a man known for temporal precision. 5 minutes might as well have been 5 hours to such a man. He inspected the inkpot, nearly full, though Vale was said to write nightly in his journal. No journal lay on the desk now. Poirot filed that away. At last, he closed the window with a decisive snap. "It is enough," he murmured. "We shall hear what the people of Halcyon Court have to say." By the time Poirot descended to the drawing-room, a small audience waited in anxious silence. The room, though rarely used by the late Mr. Vale, was warm, its fire crackling cheerfully, an ironic counterpoint to the tension filling it. Colonel Gresham stood ramrod straight before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. Mrs. Hartwell perched on the edge of an armchair, trembling like a rabbit sensing a fox. Miss Amelia Thornton sat near the window, her posture elegant but brittle. A newcomer, Mr. Adrian Lytton from number 2, had joined them, his thin fingers nervously tapping his cane. Constable Reeves stood at attention by the door. Poirot took his place before them as though addressing a jury. "Mesdames and messieurs," he began, "we find ourselves confronted with a matter both delicate and grave. Mr. Lionel Vale, a man of routine more fixed than the rising of the sun, has failed to answer his door, has left his home in a state that is, how shall we put it, too orderly, and has written to me predicting his own end." Mrs. Hartwell choked on a sob. "Calm yourself, madame," Poirot said softly. "We do not yet know if harm has befallen him. We know only that there is an irregularity, and irregularities are the seeds from which the truth grows." Colonel Gresham nodded approvingly. "Hear, hear." Poirot surveyed them. "In order to proceed, I must understand who Mr. Vale was, his habits, his acquaintances, his fears." He motioned for the colonel to begin. Gresham cleared his throat. "Vale was a decent chap, if a peculiar one. Retired banker, lived alone except for a cleaning woman who came twice a week. Never invited anyone in, couldn't stand unpredictability." "Did he have enemies?" Poirot asked. "Enemies?" the colonel snorted. "Hardly. He barely spoke to anyone." "And yet he waved to you," Poirot reminded him. "A courtesy wave. Minimal effort." The man guarded his privacy like a fortress. Poirot nodded. "Did you notice anything unusual yesterday?" Gresham paused. "Well, now that you mention it, when he passed my window yesterday at 3, he seemed off." "Off?" Poirot repeated. "Clarify." "His gait. Normally he walks like a clockwork toy, precise, measured. But yesterday his steps were irregular." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Thank you, Colonel. Very helpful." Mrs. Hartwell dabbed her eyes. "Mr. Vale was kind to me. He always offered to collect my post when I fell ill. But he had secrets. Oh yes, secrets." Poirot leaned forward. "What kind of secrets, madame?" She lowered her voice. "Women." The room collectively inhaled. Poirot raised a single brow. "Women, madame. Are you certain?" "Oh yes. I saw a woman leaving his house one evening 2 months ago. She wore a dark coat and a veil. It was very mysterious." Poirot studied her expression. "And did you mention this to anyone?" No. It felt improper." "Improper," Poirot echoed, "can often be merely another word for useful." Miss Thornton lifted her chin. "I observed no women, and I lived directly opposite." Poirot nodded. "You said earlier you heard his gramophone last night?" "Yes. It played Chopin. He loves Chopin. Or loved—" Her voice faltered. It stopped suddenly. Not faded, stopped, as though someone removed the needle. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And then?" "Nothing. Silence the rest of the night." Poirot bowed his head slightly in gratitude. Lytton shifted uncomfortably when Poirot gave him the floor. "Mr. Vale and I were not close. We exchanged greetings, that's all." Poirot studied him. "You visited him on Tuesday, did you not?" Lytton's eyes widened. How did you know? Your cane, Poirot said. There is a speck of varnish worn from its tip. Vale's tiled entryway is polished. One slip, one correction movement. That is fresh damage. Very recent. Lytton swallowed hard. I merely went to ask whether he'd joined the committee planning the autumn charity fair. Poirot's expression was unreadable. And did he? No, he refused, quite abruptly. Poirot made a small note. When all had spoken, Poirot clasped his hands and addressed them collectively. Every one of you has given me something of interest, a lifted veil here, a discrepancy there. Together they form a pattern, a tapestry, if you will. What do you think has happened? Miss Thornton whispered. Poirot looked around the room, his gaze passing from face to face. I think, he said slowly, that Mr. Lionel Vale feared something, or someone, and he prepared for an event that he believed would result in his death. Gasps rippled across the room. But, Poirot continued, what interests me more is this. There is not yet evidence of violence, only of intention, his and perhaps that of another. Colonel Gresham frowned. So what now? Now, Poirot said, we shall examine the house with the precision of a surgeon. Order, always order. And then, mes amis, the little grey cells will begin to speak. Poirot stood perfectly still for a moment, listening to the faint tick of the mantel clock. Mr. Vale vanished from a locked house, he murmured. And that, mes amis, is never an accident. Poirot excused himself from the assembled neighbours with a courtly nod and motioned for Constable Reeves to accompany him back upstairs. The others lingered in the drawing-room, murmuring with that mixture of fear and fascination that accompanies all great mysteries. The Belgian detective ascended the staircase with delicate, deliberate steps, as though he feared to disturb the dust, or more accurately, the truth. Reeves followed with considerably less grace. Sir, the constable said, nervously, do you really think Mr. Vale's been done in? Poirot did not slow. I think, mon ami, that something has occurred which has been arranged with great care. Whether Mr. Vale is alive or dead remains to be seen. But his house? His house is too tidy, too obedient. A home reflects its master. When it does not, something is amiss. At the landing, Poirot paused again before the study door, his eyes narrowing. You see, Reeves, the window left open. It was not merely a mistake, it was an invitation. Someone wished us to focus upon it. You mean misdirection? Precisely. Poirot re-entered the study and began his scrutiny anew. Reeves hovered awkwardly. Poirot approached the desk where the letter had been left. He did not touch it again. He had already committed every stroke of ink to memory. Instead, he studied the objects surrounding it. The blotter is clean, he murmured. Yet Mr. Vale was left-handed. Ink smudges would be inevitable. You see, nothing smudged. This is unnatural. He turned suddenly to Reeves. Bring me a lamp, if you please. The constable obeyed. Poirot tilted the lamp low over the wood surface. The desk gleamed perfectly, but beneath the sheen, a faint, thin line caught the light. Poirot traced the air above it with his finger, without touching. A line of indentation, he murmured. Something once lay here. A book, perhaps, or a diary. Reeves blinked. How can you tell? Because dust settles even on polished surfaces, so lightly that it is invisible except under direct light. Remove the object, and the absence becomes a shape. Reeves stared, dazzled. Poirot gave him a small smile. Do not worry, mon ami. The little grey cells are not contagious. Poirot moved to the sideboard next. Several small glass bottles sat arranged in exact symmetry. Except one. Lavender, Poirot said, lifting the stopper and sniffing. Strong, recently used. Reeves frowned. But Vale didn't use lavender water. Everyone says so. Exactly. Poirot set the bottle down carefully. So who, I wonder, did? Next, Poirot led the constable down the hallway to Mr. Vale's bedroom. The door creaked faintly when opened, as though reluctant to expose the secrets within. The room was immaculate. The bed was made so tightly the sheets could have been ironed while already in place. A dressing gown hung from a hook, positioned with geometric precision. The wardrobe doors were shut, the curtains drawn, the carpet free of even a single disturbance, which was precisely the problem. Poirot circled the bed with slow, almost reverential steps. "Not slept in," he said quietly. Reeves perked up. "How do you know, sir?" "Because no human being alive can leave a bed without disturbing the surface. Even a cat leaves an impression. But this is untouched since morning or earlier." "But that means Mr. Vale never came to bed. Last night? Or he slept elsewhere," Poirot mused. "Or he did not sleep at all." He went to the wardrobe next and flung the doors open in a single decisive motion. The clothes inside were arranged by color, then by type, then by length. Poirot scanned the line of garments, and his eyes sharpened. "One jacket is missing." Reeves inspected quickly. "Looks full to me." "No, Mr. Vale was meticulous. 11 jackets normally. Here we have 10. Poirot tapped his chin. "And the missing jacket is the dark grey tweed, the one suited for evening walks." Reeves flinched. "You think he left the house last night? Through the window?" Poirot shook his head firmly. "No. Mr. Vale would never leave through a window like a thief. And the window shows no sign of a man of his height climbing out." "Then how did he—" Poirot silenced him with a gentle gesture. "Patience. The house will reveal more." They investigated the bathroom next. It was spotless. Too spotless. The towels were folded with military precision. The porcelain gleamed. Poirot was about to leave when something caught his eye. On the lower edge of the sink basin was the faintest speck, barely visible, a dark reddish-brown fleck. Poirot leaned in. "Ah," he murmured, "at last." "What is it, sir?" Reeves whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Not blood," Poirot said calmly, "but rouge, the cosmetic." Reeves blinked. "You mean makeup? But Vale?" "No, not Vale." Poirot straightened, thoughtful. "Mrs. Hartwell spoke of a woman. Miss Thornton denied such a thing. One seeks appearances, the other seeks to protect them." He held up a finger. "And the lavender scent? A woman's perfume used recently." Reeves swallowed again. "Sir, are you suggesting a woman was in this room last night?" "I do not suggest, Constable. I observe." He cast one last look around the bathroom before turning to leave. When they returned to the landing, Reeves exhaled loudly. "So, he met a woman last night. She came here. Something happened. He vanished? It sounds straightforward enough." Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with that inevitable spark of mischief. "My dear Constable, if a case seems straightforward, it is only because you are being invited to walk down the wrong path." "A false lead?" Reeves said, crestfallen. "The first of many," Poirot said, "and not the last to involve this mysterious woman." They descended the stairs once more. At the bottom stood Miss Amelia Thornton, pale but composed, as if she had been waiting for them. She clasped her hands tightly. "Mr. Poirot," she said softly, "there's something you should know." Poirot smiled politely. "Ah, mademoiselle, secrets seem to circulate through Halcyon Court the way the wind moves through reeds. Please, share yours." She looked from Poirot to Reeves, then back. "I lied earlier." Poirot tilted his head, not surprised. "Continue." "I said I never saw a woman leaving Mr. Vale's house." She swallowed. "But I did. Last night." Reeves inhaled sharply. Poirot remained utterly still. "I didn't mention it before," she whispered, "because the woman, she wasn't a stranger." Poirot leaned in slowly. "Then who was she, mademoiselle?" Miss Thornton's eyes filled with dread. "She was someone from this crescent. Poirot's voice softened dangerously. "Whom, mademoiselle?" And she whispered, "Mrs. Hartwell." Mrs. Edith Hartwell sat alone in the drawing-room when Poirot and Constable Reeves returned from the landing. The firelight flickered across her pale features, lending her the fragile appearance of a china figurine left too close to the edge of a shelf. She looked up startled when she saw Miss Thornton hovering behind them, visibly shaken. Poirot's gaze swept from one woman to the other. "Madame Hartwell," he began with utmost gentleness, "there is a matter of some delicacy we must discuss." Mrs. Hartwell clutched her pearls, a habit Poirot had already observed, and sank even deeper into her armchair. "Is it about Mr. Vale? Has something dreadful happened?" "Mademoiselle Thornton has given us new information," Poirot said. He did not turn to Miss Thornton. His eyes remained fixed on the widow's trembling face. Mrs. Hartwell's breath hitched. "Oh?" Poirot inclined his head. "She says that last night she saw you leaving Mr. Vale's house." The widow flinched so violently her brooch rattled. Reeves crossed his arms, emboldened by the revelation. "So you were there, Mrs. Hartwell. Why didn't you say so from the start?" Mrs. Hartwell shook her head vehemently, hands trembling. No, you must understand. People talk in Halcyon Court. They take the smallest thing and turn it into scandal. I did not want anyone to think that I had some improper involvement with Mr. Vale." Poirot raised a hand. "We judge no one, madame, but we must understand what occurred." She inhaled shakily. "All right, I will tell you." "It was around 9 o'clock, she said, her voice trembling. "I could not sleep. I suffer from nerves, Mr. Poirot. My doctor gave me pills, but they make my heart race." She placed a hand over her chest. "So I went for a short walk. It was foolish, I know." Poirot nodded encouragingly. "I happened to pass Mr. Vale's house," she continued. His study window was open. I thought that odd. He despised drafts, as you know. And then I saw the light on inside. "You approached the door?" Poirot asked. "I did. I knocked. Very softly. I did not want to disturb him unnecessarily. He didn't answer, but I heard something inside the house. A faint movement, or a footstep. I cannot be certain." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Movement? And then?" Then the door opened." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Just a crack, but no one was there." Reeves stiffened. "No one opened it." "I swear to you," she insisted. "The hallway was dark. I thought Mr. Vale must have stepped into another room. I didn't want to intrude, but I was frightened he might be unwell. So I stepped inside." Poirot made no comment. He simply waited. I called his name. No answer. She pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. I should not have entered. I know that. But the house felt strange. Too still, as though someone had only just left. Poirot exchanged a subtle glance with Reeves. "I did not go far," she continued. "Just to the foot of the stairs. And then I heard the gramophone. Chopin." She shuddered. "It stopped abruptly. And then nothing. Silence." Poirot leaned in slightly. "And what did you do next, madame?" "I fled," she whispered. "I was terrified. I closed the door quickly behind me and hurried home. I didn't see anyone else. I swear it." She fell into quivering silence. Poirot studied her with the calm intensity of a man piecing together a mosaic from fragments. "Mademoiselle Thornton," Poirot said softly, "you did not see Mrs. Hartwell enter the house?" Miss Thornton shook her head. "No, only leaving, and very hastily." Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "Madame Hartwell," he said gently, "you have told us much. But there remains one small detail." Her eyes widened. What detail?" Poirot pointed toward her sleeve. On the delicate cuff of her blouse was a faint dusting of powder, lavender-colored powder. "Your blouse," Poirot said calmly. "It carries the faint scent and trace of lavender. Mrs. Hartwell's hand flew to her sleeve in alarm. "Oh, that must be from my perfume. I often apply it before bed." Poirot's expression did not change. "Your perfume, madame, is rose-based. I noticed it earlier when you sat beside me. Lavender would smell entirely different." She froze. Miss Thornton's breath caught. Reeves took a step closer. "Madame!" Poirot stepped forward, his voice soft but unyielding. "Why then does Mr. Vale's home smell of lavender, particularly in the study and bathroom? And why does your sleeve carry the same essence?" Mrs. Hartwell suddenly sagged in her seat. "All right," she whispered. "All right, I will tell you, but you must promise that this stays within this room." Poirot's eyes narrowed gently. "I promise only to follow the truth, madame." She inhaled shakily. "I went upstairs." Reeves jerked. "You what?" "I went upstairs to check on him." She wrung her hands. "But he wasn't there. His bed had not been touched. I panicked. I thought perhaps someone else was in the house, so I hurried down again and left." Poirot's gaze flicked briefly toward Miss Thornton. "And the lavender?" he asked softly. Mrs. Hartwell hesitated. I don't know. Perhaps I brushed against something." Poirot's eyes cooled. "A lie, madame." She burst into tears. Yes, I took the lavender water from his sideboard. I often admired it. I don't know why I took it. I was frightened, and I acted irrationally." Poirot remained impassive. "You stole it." She nodded miserably. Reeves scratched his head. "So she was there. She was upstairs. She entered the study. She stole perfume. It all fits. She must have—" Poirot raised a hand sharply. "Non." The constable blinked. "No." Poirot turned slowly to the fireplace, warming his hands. "Mrs. Hartwell's presence here last night is a fact," he said, "but not the right fact. It explains the lavender, but not the disappearance, nor the missing jacket, nor the spotless bed, nor the letter predicting death." He turned, eyes alight with clarity. "The lavender is not the crime. It is merely the embarrassment." Mrs. Hartwell whimpered softly. Poirot went on. "We are being led, my friends. Led down a path too obvious, too theatrical. A woman visiting at night, a frightened widow, an open window, a sudden disappearance," Miss Thornton whispered. "Then what does it mean?" Poirot's gaze sharpened like a blade. "It means," he said, "that the true clue is elsewhere. Hidden, not in what is there." He lifted the letter from his pocket. "But in what is missing?" Reeves swallowed. "What's missing, sir?" Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mr. Vale's diary." Miss Thornton froze. "His diary?" "Oui," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "He wrote nightly. Yet it is gone. Why does a man predicting his own death remove the one record of his thoughts?" Silence stretched. Poirot concluded softly, "Because someone else feared what he had written." He turned toward the staircase once more. "And now, mes amis, we must discover who." The atmosphere in the drawing room had shifted, no longer charged merely with anxiety, but with something heavier, darker. Suspicion had entered Halcyon Court like a draught through a crack under a locked door. Mrs. Hartwell wept quietly into her handkerchief. Miss Thornton stared at the floor, and Colonel Gresham looked at each of them in turn as though conducting an internal tribunal. Poirot, however, seemed almost serene, a serenity that always came when the pieces of a puzzle began, however faintly, to form a pattern. Poirot tapped the letter from Mr. Vale gently against his fingertips. "A man fears he will be dead before I arrive," he said softly. "He writes a message but keeps it brief. Why? Because he trusts that his diary will say more. Yet the diary is gone." Reeves shifted uneasily. Could he have destroyed it himself? If someone threatened him? Poirot's eyebrows lifted. If he destroyed it, why leave a letter addressed to me? Why invite me at all? "No, Constable. The diary was removed by someone who feared what it contained. Colonel Gresham stepped forward. Which means, Poirot, that someone in this crescent knew Vale was keeping records. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, someone close enough to know his habits. Someone who feared his suspicions. Miss Thornton swallowed hard. But who would know about the diary? None of us even visited his home. Poirot turned sharply. Except one. Every eye flicked toward Adrian Lytton. The thin, nervous man flinched as though struck. Mamie, what are you implying? Poirot approached him with gentle, measured steps. When you visited Mr. Vale on Tuesday, did you not enter his home? Well, yes, but only the front hall. And you saw nothing? No. Poirot tilted his head. Then allow me to ask a simple question. You went to speak to him about the charity committee. A matter of schedules, dates, planning, eh? Yet you say he refused abruptly, rudely even. Lytton nodded quickly, relieved to be back on familiar ground. Yes, he was quite sharp. I remember it clearly. Poirot's expression hardened subtly. Ah, but there is the contradiction, monsieur. Lytton blinked. Contradiction? Mr. Vale was a man obsessed with order. He planned every hour of every day. A charity event is not chaos. It is organization, structure. It is precisely the sort of task he would relish. Lytton's face drained of color. I can't help what he said. Indeed, Poirot murmured. But I wonder, was it he who refused? Or were you refusing something he wished to discuss? Miss Thornton gasped softly. Lytton staggered back, gripping his cane. This is absurd. You are twisting everything. Poirot's gaze did not soften. Then let us consider another detail. You said you did not notice anything in the house, yet your cane bears a faint white residue, wax polish from Vale's hallway tiles. But there is also a darker substance. Here. Poirot touched a small smudge near the handle. Reeves leaned in. Looks like ink. Poirot nodded. Oui. And Mr. Vale kept his diary on a writing stand near the entry hall. If someone reached for the diary, perhaps hurriedly, their hand would brush against the ink pot. Lytton clutched the cane protectively. I knocked over nothing. You're making things up. Poirot smiled sadly. No, monsieur. I do not make, I deduce. And I deduce that you took Mr. Vale's diary. Lytton's breathing quickened. This is nonsense. I left his house within minutes. I never saw any diary. Poirot stepped closer. Then how? He said softly. Did you know he kept one? Lytton froze. Reeves cursed under his breath. Got him. Poirot raised a finger. Not yet. Lytton stammered. I only assumed. No, monsieur, Poirot said, voice as sharp as glass. Assumptions are not spoken with such certainty. When you entered the house, you saw something, and whatever you saw frightened you. Lytton's eyes darted wildly. I didn't. Vale was alive. He was fine. Poirot's head snapped up. Alive? You never mentioned seeing him. Lytton's mouth opened, but no sound came. Poirot's tone lowered, gained weight. Did you see him on Tuesday, monsieur? Or did you see him last night? Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. Lytton shook his head violently. No, I didn't see him at all last night. But you were here last night, Poirot said calmly. Lytton swallowed hard enough to be heard. How can you possibly know that? Poirot gestured delicately toward the man's shoes. A small detail. Your shoes are damp at the edges, but unspotted. They have been cleaned recently, but not thoroughly. There is residue of wet leaves from the garden path of Halcyon Court. And last night? Poirot glanced outside. It rained. Reeves burst out. Lytton, why didn't you say you visited last night? Lytton backed toward the wall, shaking. I didn't go inside. I only walked past. I didn't go in. I swear it. Poirot studied him quietly. Monsieur, he said, if you saw something, now is the moment to speak. Everyone leaned in. Lytton squeezed his eyes shut. "I saw," he shuddered. "I saw someone else at Mr. Vale's door." "Who?" Reeves pressed. Lytton's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know. It was dark. They were wearing a long coat and hat. It could have been anyone." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Tall or short?" "Tall," Lytton said. "Broad shoulders." Colonel Gresham stiffened. Miss Thornton gasped. Mrs. Hartwell clutched her pearls once more. Poirot exhaled. "So, a new figure. One who enters the house after Mrs. Hartwell leaves and before Mr. Vale disappears." Reeves asked, "Should we alert headquarters, sir? Bring in more men?" Poirot raised a single finger. "No, not yet. The picture is still too blurred. A premature action may warn the true culprit." He turned slowly toward the staircase. "Someone returned to this house after Mrs. Hartwell. Someone tall, someone strong, someone who knew Mr. Vale well enough to approach his door at night." Poirot's tone dropped. "And that someone removed the diary?" Miss Thornton shivered. "But why go back? Why risk being seen?" Poirot stopped halfway up the first step. "To remove the evidence," he said. "Or to finalize their crime." Reeves frowned. "What do you mean, finalize?" Poirot looked over his shoulder. "Because I fear, Constable, that the disappearance of Mr. Vale was only the beginning. When a diary vanishes after its author, it is not to silence the dead." He paused. "It is to silence the living." A knock thundered suddenly at the front door. Everyone jumped. Reeves hurried to open it and froze. A trembling young errand boy stood there, soaked from the rain. "For Mr. Poirot," he gasped, handing over a sealed envelope. Poirot opened it. Inside was a single sheet, with 6 handwritten words. "You are too late for the second." For several heartbeats, no one moved. The message lay in Poirot's hand like a venomous thing, silent, dangerous, unmistakably deliberate. "You're too late for the second." The ticking of Mr. Vale's mantel clock seemed suddenly deafening, each tick a hammer blow driving the words deeper into the room's collective mind. Miss Thornton gasped first. "The second? But what does that mean?" Her voice trembled, small and frightened. Colonel Gresham marched forward, fists clenched. "Poirot, good Lord, does this imply another victim?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned the paper over, examining its back, then the envelope, then the handwriting with meticulous focus. Reeves swallowed hard. "Sir, you think whoever wrote this knows you're here?" Poirot finally spoke. "May we, Constable? This message was delivered within minutes of my arrival being made known. The culprit's eyes are upon us. They watch. They listen." A shudder rippled through the assembled neighbors. Mrs. Hartwell burst into tears again. "Another murder in Halcyon Court. Impossible. Who could—" Poirot raised a hand gently. "Calm, madame. Panic clouds the little grey cells." Lytton backed against the wall, pale as plaster. "You don't think Mr. Vale killed himself and someone else? Could he be deranged?" Poirot shook his head sharply. "No. Mr. Vale was frightened, not frenzied. His fear was directed outward, not inward." Reeves hesitated before asking the question hanging in the air like fog. "Then who's the second victim, sir?" Poirot lowered his eyes. "That, Constable, we must discover at once." Halcyon Court at night was a place of deep shadows and nervous silence. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the cobbles glistened under the lamps as though the street itself sweated from fear. Poirot, Reeves, Gresham, Lytton, Thornton, and even the shaken Mrs. Hartwell trailed out of Vale's house, forming a strange procession, half neighborhood watch, half funeral march. Poirot paused in the center of the crescent. "Listen," he said quietly. They did. Only the faint rustling of branches, a dog barking in some far-off street, the whisper of wind curling through narrow alleys. Reeves stepped closer. "What are we listening for, sir?" "A cry," Poirot murmured. "A struggle, a fall, anything that tells us where the second crime occurred." "But we don't even know when it happened," Mrs. Hartwell wailed. Poirot's gaze hardened. "The letter says I am too late, which means it happened recently. Very recently. Perhaps even while we stood in Mr. Vale's study." Miss Thornton gasped softly. "God help us." Poirot walked slowly along the crescent's perimeter, eyes scanning the windows, the doorsteps, the gardens. He paused at the lamppost opposite number 4, Miss Thornton's house. "Here," he whispered. Reeves rushed beside him. "What is it?" Poirot crouched and touched something near the base of the lamppost. A small, dark smear. Reeves squinted. "Blood?" Poirot shook his head. "No, not blood." He lifted his finger and examined the faint streak. "Graphite, pencil lead, smeared as though from a pencil that snapped under pressure." Miss Thornton stepped forward, bewildered. "Why would someone snap a pencil here?" Poirot straightened. "Because someone was writing something, or drawing something, or marking something." He pointed toward the cobblestones. "And because here, mademoiselle, is where the second crime occurred." Mrs. Hartwell whimpered, but Reeves frowned. "I don't see any sign of a body." Poirot's gaze snapped toward the hedge beside the lamp-post. "Search there." Reeves swallowed and stepped toward the hedge with his lantern. He parted the leaves and let out a strangled cry. The group rushed forward. There, behind the hedge, lay something unexpected. Not a body, but a pile of torn paper, soaked slightly from the damp, the fragments scattered like fallen feathers. Poirot knelt at once. Reeves held up a handful. "What is it, sir?" "What are these pages?" Poirot did not touch them. He studied the fragments with reverent focus. Lines of clean, neat handwriting covered each scrap. Familiar handwriting. Poirot closed his eyes. "It is Mr. Vale's diary." A stunned silence followed. Miss Thornton whispered, "But why tear it to pieces? Why leave it here?" Poirot rose slowly. "Because the culprit intended that we would find it, but not read it." Gresham frowned. "Why not burn it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because a fire leaves nothing. And our murderer wishes to prove that they destroyed something, wishes us to know the diary is gone and that its contents are erased." "But they left the shreds," Reeves said, confused. "So we know it existed." "Exactly," Poirot replied. "Too convenient, too dramatic. A show for the audience." He looked around slowly at the silent houses. "For us." Miss Thornton covered her mouth. "Then the real secret wasn't in the diary." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "No, which means the diary was destroyed not to hide a fact, but to hide the absence of a fact." Reeves blinked. "Meaning?" Poirot faced him directly. "Meaning there is something Mr. Vale never wrote down. Something the murderer hoped we would think was recorded, and thus lost forever." "But what?" Reeves asked. Poirot stared at the pile of shredded pages. "That," he said softly, "is the question the murderer does not want us to ask." Colonel Gresham crossed his arms, bristling. "Poirot, this is all very intriguing, but where is the second victim?" Poirot turned to him slowly. "The second crime is not murder, Colonel." "Not?" Poirot pointed to the shredded diary. "This is the second crime. The deliberate destruction of Mr. Vale's words. It is an assault not upon his life, but upon his memory." Reeves shuddered. "Sir, is it possible Vale is still alive?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "It is possible. But someone is working very hard to make us believe otherwise." Miss Thornton whispered, "Then what do we do now?" Poirot folded his hands neatly behind his back. "Now, mademoiselle, we must do what our murderer fears most." He looked at Reeves. "Constable, Gather every fragment. Not one piece must be lost. Reeves nodded quickly and began collecting the scraps. But it's impossible to reconstruct it, Reeves protested. It's all torn to bits. Poirot smiled. That is what the murderer wishes us to believe. He turned toward Mr. Vale's house. Tonight, Poirot said softly, we begin the reconstruction of a diary that no longer exists. As they turned back, a shadow moved behind a curtain in one of the houses. Watching, waiting, listening. The drawing room of Mr. Vale's house had transformed into a makeshift investigative chamber. Lamps were lit, the curtains drawn, chairs pulled close to the central table where the torn shreds of Mr. Vale's diary lay scattered like the fragments of a shattered mind. Constable Reeves sat hunched over, sorting the scraps by size and direction of the tier. His brow glistened with sweat from both the difficulty of the task and the electric intensity of the moment. Miss Thornton leaned forward anxiously, helping sort the fragments with trembling fingers. Colonel Gresham observed grimly from the fireplace, arms folded, jaw clenched. Lytton stood in a corner, pale and shivering. Mrs. Hartwell dabbed her eyes repeatedly, casting nervous glances toward the hallway as if expecting a ghost. Poirot stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharpened to a razor's edge. Begin, mes amis, he said softly. We restore order to chaos. Reeves muttered, feels like putting together the world's smallest jigsaw puzzle. Poirot smiled faintly. A puzzle, yes, but one whose solution lies not in its completion, but in its incompletion. Miss Thornton frowned. I do not understand. Poirot pointed gently at the scraps. We reconstruct not to read Mr. Vale's final thoughts, but to see what was not written, what our murderer feared. Minutes stretched into half an hour as they worked. The scraps revealed musings about the weather, notes on accounts, quotations of music Mr. Vale had enjoyed. His entries were neat, orderly, restrained. Reeves assembled a corner. Here, look, sir, this bit mentions a visitor. Poirot leaned in. The fragment read, Unexpected caller at 3 o'clock. Disturbed me greatly. Must consider whether to speak to someone about this matter. Reeves looked up. Could this be Lytton? He said he visited on Tuesday. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps, but continue. Miss Thornton assembled 2 smaller pieces. This part mentions a fear. Poirot inspected the newly formed line. Cannot shake the feeling something is wrong. Pattern of events becoming too unusual to be coincidence. Colonel Gresham huffed. He was clearly being watched, or threatened. Poirot raised a hand, or he believed so. Fear can be rational or manipulated. Lytton swallowed loudly. I didn't threaten him. Poirot ignored the outburst. They worked on. As fragments formed larger sections, a pattern revealed itself. Mr. Vale's writing grew more anxious in the last pages. Sentences shorter, words heavier. But then, Poirot stopped suddenly. Mon Dieu, he whispered. Reeves froze. What is it, sir? Poirot pointed to a cluster of fragments. These pieces, they come from the final page. And yet, he leaned closer. The page is incomplete. 2 large sections are still missing. Reeves checked the remaining pile. But, sir, we've sorted everything. These are all the scraps we collected. Poirot shook his head slowly. No, they are all the scraps the murderer intended us to collect. A collective gasp traveled around the table. You mean? Miss Thornton whispered. Yes, Poirot said softly. 2 fragments were kept. Hidden. Removed before the diary was torn. Colonel Gresham growled. Which means the killer took the most important parts. Poirot nodded. Precisely. The murderer did not intend to destroy Mr. Vale's thoughts entirely, only the crucial ones. Reeves frowned. But what could the missing sections say? Poirot straightened. That, he said, We must deduce. Look here." He pointed to the barely connected fragments. The visible text read, "If they come again tonight, I shall—" Miss Thornton inhaled sharply. "Again? So someone had already visited him recently?" "Exactly," Poirot murmured. "Someone returned, someone persistent." Another section read, "Must trust the one person who can—" Reeves blinked. "Who? Poirot?" Poirot shook his head. "The letter to me was separate. No, this refers to someone else. Someone here. Someone Vale thought he could trust." Every gaze slowly shifted around the room. Reeves whispered, "Who is the one person he trusted?" Poirot exhaled slowly. "That, Constable, is the very heart of the matter." Poirot suddenly swept aside the fragments nearest him and picked up the letter Vale had written. "Observe," he said. "The handwriting in this letter is slightly less steady than in the diary. A sign of stress." Reeves leaned closer. "So?" "So," Poirot continued, "Mr. Vale was frightened. He believed danger was imminent. Yet this letter contains only a single sentence. Why so short?" "Because he ran out of time," Miss Thornton suggested. Poirot shook his head. "No, because he believed he had said enough. Elsewhere." Lytton stammered, "In the diary." Poirot tapped the table. "Just so. And now ask yourself, why would he hide 2 sections of the final page? Why would the murderer take only 2 pieces? Why not the entire page?" Gresham frowned. "Because they contained something specific." Poirot's eyes gleamed like polished onyx. "No, because the missing lines complete a phrase, one that would identify the person Vale trusted." The room fell into a hush. Poirot continued, voice soft but intense. "Someone Mr. Vale trusted enough to reveal his fear. Someone he expected might aid him. Someone who might enter his home without suspicion." The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Mrs. Hartwell whispered, But who could that be? He was reclusive. He trusted no one." Poirot raised a finger. "No, madame. He trusted someone who is lying to us even now." Lytton shivered. "But how do we determine who that is?" Poirot smiled gently. "By logic, monsieur. The 2 missing fragments must relate directly to the trusted person. So ask yourself, what kind of sentences end with the fragments we still possess?" He pointed to the 2 incomplete lines. "If they come again tonight, I shall—" "Must trust the one person who can," Poirot whispered. "The first implies a plan. The second implies a confidant." Reeves frowned. "A plan? What plan?" Poirot spoke slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Mr. Vale expected someone to come last night. He prepared. He set a trap, or arranged something, and the one person he trusted was meant to help him." Miss Thornton clutched her throat. "You mean Vale wasn't trying to escape danger, but confront it?" "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly. "And something went catastrophically wrong." Colonel Gresham burst out. "So which one of us was he planning to meet? Who was the confidant?" Poirot turned toward the window. "In a moment," he said, "I will tell you, for the little grey cells have spoken." Everyone froze. Reeves stammered, "You know?" Poirot gave a small, solemn nod. "Yes. At last, a pattern emerges." He placed the last reconstructed fragment down on the table. "And now," Poirot said softly, "we must confront the person Mr. Vale trusted most, because that person knows more than they have told us." Just then, a scream ripped through the crescent, high, terrified, echoing from outside. Reeves bolted upright. "That came from number 8, Mrs. Reeves' house." Poirot's eyes flashed. "The second crime is finished," Demi whispered. "And now begins the third." The scream shattered Halcyon Court like a hammer against glass. Poirot was already halfway to the door before anyone else moved. Reeves stumbled after him, fumbling for his lantern. Miss Thornton gasped and clutched her coat. Even the rigid Colonel Gresham broke into a run, his military training rushing back with alarming clarity. As the group spilled into the chilly night, Poirot lifted a hand. "Silence! Listen!" And they did. Another cry, this one muffled, desperate, echoed from number 8, the home of Constable Reeves and his wife. Reeves went pale. "Emily!" He sprinted ahead, nearly slipping on the wet cobblestones, and banged on the door. "Emily! Emily! Answer me!" No reply. Poirot reached the doorstep and immediately lifted a finger to silence everyone. "Stand back!" Reeves's panic made him deaf to caution. He threw himself against the door. "Emily!" Poirot stepped forward suddenly, gripping Reeves's arm with surprising strength. "Constable," he said softly but firmly, "do not break the door. Look." He pointed at the keyhole. A key was inserted from the inside. Reeves froze. "That means she locked it herself." Poirot nodded. "Which means she is alive. We must not frighten her further." He knocked gently. "Madame Reeves, it is Hercule Poirot. Please open the door." Footsteps approached from within. Slow, shaky. The lock clicked. The door opened 2 inches. A single terrified eye peered out. Poirot bowed his head gently. "May we enter?" The door swung open. Mrs. Emily Reeves stood trembling in her nightgown, hands shaking so violently she could hardly keep her grip on the doorknob. "George, they were here," she whispered. "They were in the house." Reeves caught her shoulders. Who? Who was here?" She pointed toward the back hallway. "I heard someone moving. I thought it was you returning early, but when I called out, they didn't answer." Poirot's expression sharpened. "You heard footsteps?" She nodded rapidly. "Yes, heavy ones. Slow. I locked myself in the bedroom. Then someone rattled the handle." Miss Thornton gasped. Colonel Gresham marched past with military authority. "Let's find this devil." But Poirot lifted a hand. "No, Colonel, the intruder is gone." Reeves blinked. "How can you tell?" Poirot pointed to the open kitchen window. Its curtains fluttered gently with the night breeze. "The entry and escape," Poirot murmured. "The third crime was not murder. It was intrusion, a psychological blow." Mrs. Reeves whimpered. "But why? Why come here?" Poirot answered slowly. "To steal." Gresham looked around angrily. "Steal what? Nothing's disturbed." Poirot approached the writing desk in the corner of the parlor. He pointed to the small wooden box where Mrs. Reeves kept household notes. The drawer hung open. "Someone searched here," Poirot said. Reeves frowned. "For money?" Poirot shook his head. "No, they searched for something small, something easy to hide, something they believed was here." Emily Reeves covered her mouth. Oh, George. This morning Mr. Vale asked me for an envelope. He said he needed a safe place to leave something. So I gave him one of mine." Poirot's head snapped up. "What did the envelope contain?" I don't know," she stammered. "It was already sealed." Poirot leaned in. "And where did he leave it?" Emily pointed to the very drawer that now stood open. Poirot closed his eyes. "The missing fragments," he murmured. Miss Thornton gasped. "The torn diary pieces. The missing ones?" "Oui," Poirot said. "Mr. Vale entrusted them not to a friend, not to a neighbor, as we assumed, but to someone he believed incorruptible." His eyes settled on the stunned constable. "A policeman." Reeves swallowed hard. "So the killer came here to find them, but Emily locked the door." Poirot nodded. "And thus the intruder fled." Gresham snarled. "Whoever it is getting desperate." Poirot turned away from the desk, his mind racing. "Desperation," he murmured, "often reveals truth." Poirot approached the parlor window, gazing out into the night with a troubled expression. Behind him, Reeves and his wife held each other. Miss Thornton tried to steady her breath, and Gresham paced like a caged lion. Then Poirot stopped suddenly. "Emily," he said gently without turning, "did Mr. Vale ask for anything else this morning?" She hesitated. "Oh, well, yes. He asked for a pencil too. A fresh one." Poirot spun. "A pencil?" "Yes. He gave me a broken stub and said he needed a better one to write clearly." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Constable, where do you keep pencils?" Reeves blinked. "In the bottom drawer. The one next to the envelope box." Poirot opened it. Empty. He held the drawer up for all to see. "Do you understand, mes amis? The broken pencil under the lamppost was Mr. Vale's. He was writing something, perhaps even rewriting the missing fragments, when the murderer interrupted him. Miss Thornton whispered, and tore them from him." Poirot nodded. "Yes. But now listen. There is more." He removed the drawer fully and held it sideways. A tiny scrap of paper fluttered out. Poirot caught it mid-air with astonishing reflex. Reeves gasped. "That wasn't there before." Poirot smiled faintly. It was stuck beneath the drawer's underside. Our murderer overlooked it. He unfolded the scrap. The handwriting was unmistakably Vale's. Neat, controlled, strained. He read aloud. "Trust only the one who never knocks." A silence plunged through the room. Colonel Gresham frowned deeply. "What the devil does that mean?" Miss Thornton whispered. "Trust only the one who never knocks." Reeves blinked. "Someone who doesn't knock at Vale's door, but everyone knocks, except—" Poirot raised a hand. "Except, Constable, those who have a key." A wave of understanding rippled through them. Mrs. Hartwell gasped. Oh, dear Lord." Miss Thornton stifled a cry. It can't be." Colonel Gresham's mustache bristled. "Are you saying—" Poirot turned slowly, deliberately, face like carved marble, voice like a blade. "There is only one person in Halcyon Court who never knocked at Mr. Vale's door. One person who entered freely, regularly, without announcement." He looked directly at the group. Then, with chilling precision, he spoke. "The cleaning woman." A collective breath was sucked from the room. Mrs. Hartwell whispered, "But she's been ill for 2 weeks." Poirot shook his head slowly. "Non, madame. She said she was ill, but in truth, she has vanished. No one has seen her for days." Reeves stared at Poirot, stunned. "Sir, are you saying the cleaning woman, Mrs. Drake, might be involved?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur, I'm saying this. Mrs. Drake was the only person Mr. Vale allowed into his home without knocking. She would know his routines, his fears, his diary." Miss Thornton whispered. "She could have taken the jacket, moved through the house unseen, known every hiding place." Poirot nodded. "And she could enter at night without raising suspicion." Gresham sputtered. "But then why disappear? Why not speak to us?" Poirot stepped toward the door. "That," he said, "is what we must learn tonight, for I fear Mrs. Drake's disappearance is not voluntary." He turned back once more. "And if she is alive, she is now the murderer's 4th target." Rain began again. Soft at first, then steadily more insistent. As Poirot, Constable Reeves and the remaining neighbors gathered under the dim lantern outside number 8. The crescent glistened with a thin sheen of water, each stone reflecting distorted shapes like a broken mirror. Poirot lifted his chin slightly, letting the drizzle bead across his immaculate hat. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "we must move quickly. Mrs. Drake is in danger, and with each hour, our murderer grows more desperate." Reeves wiped rain from his brow. "But, sir, where do we search? She hasn't been seen around Halcyon Court in days." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "A disappearance is never without a trace. We will follow the pattern, and we begin with the place she visited most." Colonel Gresham frowned. "Vale's house." Poirot nodded. Miss Thornton shivered visibly. "You think she returned there? After whatever happened?" "I think the key to this mystery lies with Mrs. Drake," Poirot said calmly. "And with what she knew." Mrs. Hartwell clutched her umbrella tighter. She was such a quiet woman. I never imagined... Poirot turned abruptly. "Quiet, yes. Invisible, yes. But invisible people often see the most." They hurried back across the crescent toward Vale's townhouse. The darkness pressed in around them, and somewhere in the distance a door slammed, echoing through the night like a gunshot. Back inside Mr. Vale's immaculate home, Poirot paused at the threshold, inhaling slowly. "Do you smell that?" he asked softly. Reeves sniffed. "Just the usual. Dust polish. Lavender." Poirot shook his head. "No, something new. Something faint." He led them deeper into the hallway, stopping near the narrow service door that led toward the kitchen and utility rooms. Colonel Gresham stepped forward. "You think she might be hiding in the back rooms?" Poirot shook his head again. "Not hiding, but she has been here." He pointed to the floor. Reeves knelt. "Mud," he muttered. "Fresh mud. Someone came through the back entrance." Poirot nodded. And Mrs. Drake would know every entry, every exit. He pushed open the service corridor door and stepped inside. The corridor was narrow, lined with hooks for coats and aprons, shelves for cleaning supplies, and an old wooden chair with a cushion so thin it seemed hardly meant for sitting. Poirot touched the cushion gently. "It is warm," he murmured. Miss Thornton gasped. She was just here." Reeves moved forward. "Mrs. Drake, it's Constable Reeves. If you're here, answer." Silence. Poirot raised a finger sharply, freezing them in place. From farther down the corridor came a faint sound, soft, muffled, a kind of trembling breath. Poirot stepped toward the utility room at the far end. Slowly, he opened the door. Inside, curled against the wall behind a stack of crates, sat Mrs. Drake. Her clothes were drenched from the rain, her hair plastered to her forehead, her skin pale as chalk. She clutched her arms tightly around herself, rocking faintly. Miss Thornton gasped. "Oh, heavens, she's alive!" Reeves rushed forward. "Mrs. Drake, are you hurt?" The woman flinched violently at his voice, covering her head with her hands. Poirot crouched down slowly, his voice gentle, soft, soothing. "Madame Drake, écoutez-moi. We are here to help you." She looked up. Poirot saw her eyes, and something inside him hardened. Fear. Deep, primal fear. The fear of someone who had seen too much. Mrs. Drake whispered hoarsely, He said he would kill me. If I spoke." Reeves stiffened. Who? Who threatened you?" Mrs. Drake shook her head frantically. No. He watches. He listens. Always." Poirot leaned closer, voice calm and warm as sunlight. "You must trust me, madame. You were the one person Mr. Vale trusted. And now, we must trust you." Tears streamed down Mrs. Drake's cheeks. I never meant to be involved. I just cleaned. I just worked. I saw things. I shouldn't have seen." Poirot held her gaze. "What did you see?" She swallowed and whispered, "I saw the man who visited Mr. Vale at night." Miss Thornton gasped. "There was a man. Not just the woman Mrs. Hartwell mentioned." Poirot nodded softly. "I suspected as much." Mrs. Drake continued, voice trembling, broken. "He came 3 nights ago. Late. Mr. Vale let him in. They argued, quietly, but I heard the anger. Then Mr. Vale returned the next morning with a bruise on his jaw." Reeves stiffened. "A man strong enough to bruise him." Mrs. Drake nodded. "Tall, broad, dark coat." The same description Lytton had given. Miss Thornton turned slowly toward him, but Poirot raised a hand. "No, not yet." He looked at Mrs. Drake again. "Madame, did Mr. Vale say who this man was?" She nodded faintly and whispered, "He said, 'It is him. He's come back.'" Poirot inhaled slowly. "Back," he repeated softly. "Then this is not a stranger." Mrs. Drake choked out another whisper. "He said the man wanted something from him, something that belonged to him, something Vale had kept hidden." Reeves blinked. Hidden? What could Vale be hiding? Mrs. Drake wiped her eyes. Mr. Vale had another life. A long time ago, he never spoke of it, but he kept something from it. Something important. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "At last," he breathed, "the shadows lengthen in the right direction." Colonel Gresham demanded, "What was this thing he hid?" Mrs. Drake shook her head. "I don't know, but he had a safe under the floorboard in his study." Miss Thornton gasped. "The study!" Reeves shouted. "We searched the study." Poirot lifted a hand. "You searched what the murderer allowed you to see, but the true safe, no, that you did not see." He stood. "Take Mrs. Drake to the drawing room. She is no longer safe alone." Reeves obeyed, carefully guiding the trembling woman. Poirot walked toward the study with the purposeful calm of a man who has finally seen the outline of the truth. In the study, Poirot knelt beside the rug. "Observe," he said softly. "The edge is slightly misaligned. Moved recently." He peeled the rug back. A floorboard had been lifted and replaced, just slightly crooked. Poirot pressed it. It clicked. He lifted it. Beneath was a small iron safe, built discreetly into the foundation. Colonel Gresham whistled. So Vale hid something, something the murderer wanted. Poirot nodded. He examined the lock. "It has been opened recently," he murmured. "And emptied." Miss Thornton whispered. "Then the killer took whatever was inside." Poirot's gaze grew distant, calculating. "Yes, and whatever it was worth killing for." He closed the safe gently and stood. "Now, mes amis," he said softly, "the time has come. The murderer has revealed their final card." He turned to face them, his eyes sharp as a blade. "I know who killed Mr. Vale." It was close to midnight when Hercule Poirot assembled the small, trembling group in Mr. Vale's drawing room for the final time. The fire crackled. The shadows leaned long across the carpet. Outside, Halcyon Court lay silent and still, waiting. Mrs. Hartwell sat wringing her handkerchief. Miss Thornton perched on the edge of a chair, face pale, eyes wide. Colonel Gresham stood stiffly near the mantel, and Adrian Lytton hovered near the door like a man ready to flee. Mrs. Drake, wrapped in a blanket, sat trembling beside Mrs. Reeves. Constable Reeves stayed at his post by the entrance, jaw tight, hand lightly gripping his truncheon. Poirot stood before them, small yet commanding, his immaculate attire untouched by the chaos around him. "Mes amis," he began quietly, "we have reached the end." A nervous murmur passed through the room. Poirot raised a hand. The disappearance of Mr. Lionel Vale, the destruction of his diary, the intrusion tonight, the growing terror in Halcyon Court, all of it forms a precise pattern, a pattern that, once seen, cannot be unseen. He walked toward the fireplace. "Let us begin with Mr. Vale himself, a man of order, routine, discipline, yet beneath this mask, a secret life from long ago." Colonel Gresham frowned. "What secret?" Poirot turned to him. Mr. Vale was not always Mr. Vale. A gasp. Mrs. Hartwell clutched her pearls. Poirot continued. 25 years ago, he was Lionel Vale, a banker in France. He fled the country after a scandal. Something to do with a missing sum of money. A sizable sum, Miss Thornton whispered. "A thief." Poirot smiled sadly. "No, mademoiselle. Not a thief. A man who discovered someone else's embezzlement scheme and fled before he could be framed for it." He paused. "And the person who committed the crime, the true culprit, was never caught." Reeves stiffened. "You think the man Vale feared was that culprit?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, and that man found him again, Lytton swallowed hard. But who is this man? Poirot stepped into the center of the room. To answer that, let us return to the clues. Someone tall, strong, broad-shouldered. Someone who visited late at night. Someone who knew the study well enough to empty the secret safe. Someone who could tear apart a diary in haste. Someone desperate. Someone familiar enough with Vale to pursue him across countries. Someone whose appearance fits the description given by both Lytton and Mrs. Drake. Someone whose presence explains everything. He turned sharply. Colonel Arthur Gresham. The colonel jolted as though struck. What is this? Outrageous, utterly absurd. Mrs. Hartwell gave a shriek. Miss Thornton gasped. Reeves stepped forward, eyes wide. Poirot remained calm. Non, Colonel, you have played the military gentleman very convincingly, but there were cracks. He raised a finger. You told us you saw Mr. Vale on his walk at exactly 3 o'clock. Precisely. And yet Mademoiselle Thornton heard the gramophone at 9. Played abruptly. But, Colonel, you reported hearing nothing at all, even though your windows face Vale's house. Gresham stammered. I was reading. Poirot cut him off. You said you heard Vale's steps irregular the previous day. Yet you also claimed he barely spoke to anyone. How would you know his gait so intimately? The colonel paled. Coincidence? Poirot raised his voice, and the final piece, the safe in Vale's study, was opened with no sign of force, meaning someone had the combination, someone who tortured it out of Vale, a man strong enough to bruise him, a man who threatened Mrs. Drake. Poirot's voice sank to a near whisper. A man like you. The colonel staggered back, face draining of all color. You have no proof? Nothing. Poirot sighed. Ah, but I do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a torn diary fragment. Mrs. Hartwell gasped. Reeves muttered, I thought we collected them all. Poirot nodded. Indeed we did, except the ones the murderer dropped while fleeing the Reeves household. This piece contains part of the missing sentence. He held it up. In Mr. Vale's handwriting, it is Arthur who returned. God help me. A dead silence. Gresham's knees buckled. No. Poirot's voice was steady, cold, final. You came to Vale 3 nights ago, demanding he give you the evidence from the old scandal, the papers he hid in the safe. But Vale refused. You struck him, threatened him. He wrote to me because he knew you would return. Miss Thornton cried out. Mrs. Hartwell fainted. Poirot went on. You returned last night. You forced Vale to open the safe. You took the documents that could expose you utterly. And when he tried to flee, you killed him. Reeves gasped. Killed? Poirot nodded solemnly. Oui. Mr. Vale is dead. His body is not missing. It is hidden. Poirot turned, pointing toward the rear utility corridor. Behind the coal shed, buried beneath the loose stone Mrs. Drake stepped over when she fled here tonight. Mrs. Drake sobbed into her blanket. Poirot glanced at Reeves. Constable, you will find the body exactly where I have said. The bruising on his jaw will match Colonel Gresham's striking hand. And the torn fabric found earlier near the hedge, grey wool, comes from his coat. Gresham collapsed to his knees. He was going to ruin me. Poirot's eyes hardened. And so you ruined him first. Reeves stepped forward, drawing his handcuffs. Colonel Arthur Gresham, you are under arrest for the murder of Lionel Vale. Gresham offered no resistance. His shoulders sagged under the crushing weight of truth. Mrs. Drake whispered, He said he'd kill me if I told. Poirot approached her gently. You did well to survive, madame. She wept into her hands. Miss Thornton turned to Poirot, trembling. How did you know? When did you know? Poirot smiled wearily. When the colonel criticized the positioning of Vale's hats. Only someone who had entered before, who had once been familiar with the house, would know how they were normally arranged. He bowed his head. and when I saw the indentation where the diary once lay, I realized the murderer was someone who feared written truth. Reeves turned back from the colonel, and Vale's message, "Trust only the one who never knocks." Poirot nodded. That was Mrs. Drake. She entered with a key, never knocking. He trusted only her to hide the fragments. And she did, until fear consumed her. He exhaled softly. And now, mes amis, the mystery is complete. The fire crackled. Rain pattered softly against the window. Gresham was led out into the darkness. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie, and turned toward the door. Miss Thornton whispered, "Monsieur Poirot, what will you do now?" Poirot gave his gentle, tired smile. "I, mademoiselle, will return to my rooms. This case, it has left even Hercule Poirot a little weary." He paused at the threshold. "But always remember, order and truth, they walk hand in hand, and no matter how deep the shadows—" He tapped his temple lightly. "Les petites cellules grises will find the light." With that, Hercule Poirot stepped out into the rain, his silhouette disappearing into the night, leaving Halcyon Court forever changed.